Hello and welcome to another edition of Eastern Europe Review, the program that talks about countries east of Poland, mainly Russia, Belarus and Ukraine. This is a joint production of BELSAT TV and TVP World. My name is Igor Kulek, and let's look at today's headlines. Lukashenko's provocation scenarios on the border with the European Union.
We all understand that Belarus today, from a military point of view, is a part of the re-established Russian Empire.
Militaristic propaganda for school children. Russian children are undergoing practical war training.
We are not going against the Ukrainian people, but precisely against bandits, terrorists.
Belarusian democratic forces put forward different tactics for the liberation of Belarus.
How can there be dialogue if we don't have power?
Lukashenko has been seeking a conflict with NATO. At least this is the impression given by recent events. Consequently, Lithuania is discussing the potential closure of its borders, while Poland is reinforcing security along its border regions. The presence of the so-called Wagner fighters in Belarus is a confirmed fact. Additionally, they can be joined by special forces from Afghanistan. The question arises, what might Lukashenko and Putin be preparing, and what drives Lukashenko's motives?
The situation on the Belarusian-Polish border is far from peaceful. Stones and firecrackers have been hurled towards the Polish border guards. Sometimes shots are heard in the sky. We all understand that Belarus today, from a military point of view, is a part of the re-established Russian Empire. Therefore, these hybrid attacks on Polish territory are certainly coordinated with the Kremlin. The Telegram channel Belarusian Intelligence has released information about a special operation called the Surf. This information is claimed to be classified. The channel had received it from an insider. According to them, the Belarusian State Security Committee developed a special operation in 2021, which has now entered its active phase. If it is true, approximately 50 Afgan Special Forces soldiers are said to be currently located in Belarus. Allegedly, they are alongside members of the private military campaign Wagner and KGB officers, all staying in the border zone of Hrodna. Each individual operates undercover with their own fabricated identity. The participants of this special operation are expected to be ready by September the 1st. The exact implications of these events remain unknown, as further details have not been disclosed. However, it is suggested that they might possess Western-style small-caliber firearms. Consequently, these Afghan forces could potentially be deployed to fire upon the Polish border with the intention of later accusing Poland of engaging in provocation. We can deal with the growth of a migratory wave that had been provoked artificially. Migrants can be trained. They can be armed and able to fight. We can also deal with the uncontrolled actions of the Wagnerites. For example, they can leave their quarters in an unknown direction, having the weapons in their hands. The Belarusian authorities may even stage a special operation to capture them. But it's only about testing out the Polish defense system and how society will react to it. On October the 15th, the parliamentary elections will take place in Poland. Lukashenko and Putin might use the situation to destabilize the situation within the European country and polarize a segment of the population that opposes assistance to Ukraine against the authorities. Lukashenko, on a personal level, could benefit from such escalation to foster opposition against the West among Belarusians and rally their support. Additionally, Lukashenko has been attempting to negotiate with Western powers, offering the possibility of withholding support for the Wagner fighters in exchange for partially lifting sanctions and facilitating fertilizer trade. If you look at the balance of the foreign trade between Belarus and Russia, then in the past year it leaned in favor of Belarus. Russia is less assertive about any changes. That is why the role of the Belarusian military industry sector in the context of the Russian military operation has been growing. In this way, Lukashenko wants to improve his negotiating position in relation to Russia. Lukashenko is interested in escalating tensions because it's a win in all the three areas. In my opinion, the regime thinks this way. This improves the negotiating position, and in this regard, we should expect the situation to get worse. Poland has deployed 2,000 troops to its border with Belarus, with the expectation of additional soldiers arriving in the near future. Meanwhile, Lithuania is discussing the possibility of entirely shutting its borders with Belarus. Poland may consider similar steps. We have asked our partners to maintain the capacity for humanitarian communications so that each of these countries maintains one border crossing for the movement of people. The closure of borders will significantly impact the interests of Lukashenko and Putin, particularly if the flow of cargo comes to a halt. However, if only the checkpoints for cars and buses are closed, it will primarily affect ordinary Belarusians, who would become the victims of this action.
Summer break in a camouflage uniform. Russian schoolchildren are being educated that a true patriot of their nation wears a military uniform and is ready to engage in any battle under the commander's orders without hesitation. These so-called military patriotic programs are held in different regions during children's summer camps, where they learn how to handle weapons and the basics of combat. Essentially, teenagers are being prepared for war with Ukraine, both physically and morally.
As summer morning at the children's health camp Energetic in the far east of Russia, near the city of Khabarovsk, begins with the assembly and raising of the national flag. Following this, young boys and girls dressed in camouflage uniforms engage in various training activities, including physical exercises, practice with various types of weaponry, tactical drills, and learning how to provide medical assistance to the wounded. I believe that Russian people should grow up to be patriots. Military training will always, one way or another, come in handy. Since I'm 17, it feels like the front is close. Okay, it feels like this knowledge is important. Here, adult mentors often equate the concepts of patriotism and the army. The camp's instructors consist of professional military personnel, some of whom have already fought in Ukraine. They openly acknowledge that they are preparing children for potential participation in aggression against other states. The military training is conducted within the context of ideological indoctrination, following the established Kremlin methodologies. We are not going against the Ukrainian people, but precisely against bandits, terrorists. So that's how it is in that respect. Staying in the children's camp is free, with the state covering the expenses. During the selection process for this session, priority was given to teenagers from low-income families and those with military backgrounds. The underlying notion was that these groups would be the most receptive to the indoctrination into the ideals of imperial militarism.
I first wanted to become a doctor or a vet, but then I changed my mind. Now I want to become a military medic. My dad fought in the war. He's a military man, and I want to follow in his footsteps.
One of the central principles emphasized by the instructors here is that orders are not open to negotiation. The commander's authority is absolute, and this principle extends throughout the entire hierarchy of power in the country, starting with the Supreme Commander Vladimir Putin. They should know that discipline, above all, is the basis of everything. That is why we have them attending classes in uniform, working in uniforms, and practicing in uniforms. Notably, these developments are unfolding alongside the introduction of new history textbooks, where Russia's involvement in the conflict with Ukraine has been labeled as a preventative measure. Additionally, Kremlin ideologists have completely rewritten sections covering the period from the 1970s to the 2000s. Moreover, the new section, outlining events from 2014 to the present, includes chapters devoted to the ongoing war.
Belarusian democratic forces are putting forward different tactics for the liberation of Belarus. Some insist on a political approach to the struggle, while others suggest that the central focus should be on the military component. The new Belarus conference in Warsaw revealed not only the priorities of democratic structures, but also their ambitions. Neither side denies the significance of the other, but the question is which one should dominate. However, the resources of both Vilnius, Warsaw and Kiev opposition groups are severely limited. What do they propose, and can they reach an agreement?
A tank march on Belarus is utopia. It definitely won't give anything. I consider all of this to be a form of militant dilettantism and nothing more. To fight or create institutions? The new Belarus conference, which brought together Belarusian democratic and military forces in Warsaw, revealed a divergence of opinions on which tactic should dominate in liberating the country.
Nationally oriented democratic forces are not united. We believe that the main reason for this lack of unity is the absence of a common strategy and shared preparation for various scenarios.
The office of President-elect, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, responsible for political actions, also engages with the military component. In turn, Kastus Kalinowski's regiment, which is fighting on the side of Ukraine in the war, is attempting to gain political influence. Each side has its ambitions to dominate, but the office's ability to impact the situation within the country is limited, and Belarusian volunteers remain part of the armed forces of Ukraine. The problem is that supporters of both approaches, although the division here is somewhat arbitrary, simply don't have the appropriate resources. There is no way to influence the situation in Belarus, and in times of such uncertainty and frustration, quarrels begin. Pavel Kuchta, a representative of the Kastus Kalinowski regiment, proposed at the conference to establish a national liberation movement as the sole prerequisite to the possibility of deoccupation and new elections in Belarus. The movement is supposed to consist of exactly two components. The first is the military component, both Kalinowski's regiment and its reserve forces outside the country and the underground movement within its borders. The war in which Belarus is involved today puts the force component in primary position. During times of war, the whole of society works for the army, concentrates its forces and resources on it, supports it with all possible efforts and tools. The next component is the political diplomatic aspect, which should operate in seamless coordination with the military dimension. According to Pavel, the regiment is ready to be the military center of this national liberation movement. However, it seems their aspirations extend beyond assuming a military role. In fact, they aim to become its focal point. However, such a scenario won't make the Liberation March on Minsk, which is being discussed by Belarusian society, more likely. The volunteer forces of Belarusians abroad are still incomparable with the capacity of Belarusian or Russian armies. Changes in Belarus can take a more complicated path than that imagined by supporters of one or another of the approaches. It can be some kind of hybrid path. Yes, Lukashenko understands power. You need to show your fist, but it isn't necessary to hit with that fist. The Belarusian group of anonymous hacker activists, cyber partisans, also considers the use of force a necessary aspect of today's tactics, but not for the sake of a real war, rather for the sake of making the Belarusian democratic side a viable subject.
How can there be dialogue if we don't have power? It's possible that we will come to the moment when negotiations begin, and without this power, without the power bloc, they will be impossible.
Belarusian opponents of the regime must determine how these two forces, political and military one, can cooperate for the Belarusian cause. Perhaps for this purpose, Kastus Kalinowski's regiment has announced its conference in Kiev, which supposedly will take place this autumn. The only question is whether Belarusian democratic forces from Vilnius and Warsaw will be able to participate.
And that's it for today. The Eastern Europe Review will be back next Sunday. Please stay with us, keep watching TVP World and supporting Ukraine.